welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today we're looking at a brand new archetype called xiangjian, and they're from Burst of Destiny, the brand new set. It says here as part of the notes, first of all, we will be from this point on referring to them as Swordmaster of the Illusory Iris, which is because of the theme name in the set. While the latter part is obviously sword, the kanji can refer to a variety of things such as elemental wheels to destiny to teaching. So it's a very loaded word, and with the Chinese influences of this group, they'll be using the Chinese sounding name. Mo Yi, the Zhang Swordmaster, is a level 4 water attribute worm type effect monster with 1700 attack and 1800 defense. You can only use this card's name's first and second effects once per turn. 1. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can reveal one xiangjian monster or one worm type monster in your hand. Special summon one xiangjian token. It's a worm tuner water level 4 with 0 attack and 0 defense. While that token is on the field, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except synchro monsters. And 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material, you can draw one card. This is quite an interesting card. For starters, it does have a very balanced attack and defense, which makes it a lot more usable than certain cards. The first effect lets you just reveal either a xiangjian monster or a worm type monster from your hand to then go into a token. That token is classified as a tuner monster, which means you can actually just use this card and the other monster as just a generic synchro. The monsters summoned have to be synchros because that's what the token is there for. It stops you from going into anything else, but that's fine. You get an instant level 8 monster. There are no restrictions really to that effect. You can really choose and go into any level 8 you want. It's not restricting of type, attribute, attack stat, defense stat. You can do anything you want with it, so long as it's a synchro monster. The secondary ability is also nice because you just use this as a synchro material, you just get to draw a new card. That means you're replacing this card for something else. And I can see why a lot of people have been very excited as this archetype has been revealed. I'm sure it is going to be one of the fan favourites within the set, and definitely there are going to be a few chase cards. Tai A, the xiangjian Swordmaster, is a level 8 wind attribute worm type effect monster with 1800 attack and 1500 defense. You can only use this card's name's first and second effects once per turn each. 1. You can banish one xiangjian card or one worm type monster from your graveyard. Special summon one xiangjian token. It's worm type tuner water level 4, 0 attack and defense. While that token is on the field, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except synchro monsters. And 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material, you can send one xiangjian card or one worm type monster from your deck to the graveyard. So I'm starting to see some common themes about how the deck likes to work. It seems the first effect likes to do something with one of your xiangjian monsters and revealing them or banishing them or something else with that type of effect to be able to generate a token and then to be able to go into your synchro play. Of course, if this is used as a synchro material as its second ability, you're then able to Foolish Burial one of your xiangjian monsters or one of the worm type monsters from the deck to the graveyard. It's a decent enough effect, but I would prefer the first monster actually to this one just because it seems a little bit more usable. Not to say that this is bad, but you're having to banish these other cards to trigger off these effects, and there's always that concern that maybe not going to be able to recover them quite as easily as you hoped. Long Yang, the xiangjian Tactician, is a level 6 fire attribute worm type effect monster. It's got 1200 attack and 2300 defense. You can only use this card's name's first and second effects once per turn. 1. You can discard one other xiangjian card or worm monster. Special summon this card from your hand. Then you can special summon one xiangjian token. Worm tuner water level 4, 0 attack and defense. While that token is on the field, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except synchro monsters. 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material, you can inflict 1200 damage to your opponent. So I'm guessing since this is a level 6 monster and the token you're summoning is a level 4, that there's going to be a level 10 synchro somewhere down this list. That's the only way I can see that working, because even the monster down below this is also a level 6. The discard effect is fine because actually I'd rather discard something to special summon this than to have to just normal summon this by attributing something you've got already on your field. It's much faster than some of the other examples of monsters you've had in the past. I'm talking about 10-15 years ago, where this tended to be a nuisance of an effect. It's fine because it generates the token. You've got the special summon coming about on board. That means you can actually go into an additional normal summon within your turn. The secondary ability, when it's used as single material, inflicting 1,200 points of consistent burn damage is not bad. I know it's equivalent to its attack, and if your opponent is on very low life points, that can be enough to just take them out. Even if they can recover their life points, you're being able to lower them to a point where they might not be able to use cards that require payments, like costs. Anything like the Solemn cards that might need a specific amount, like Solemn Strike with 1,500 life points. Bringing them below that level is always a good idea. It's definitely something you'd want to be running maybe 1 to 2 copies of, and at least it's a defensive monster as well, so if you don't even want to use it during that turn, if your opponent has a certain amount of back row, you can always sleep on this card as well. Chonjun the Xiangjian Auspicious Beast is a level 6 Earth Attribute Worm type effect monster with 2,400 attack and 1,800 defense. You can only use this card's name's first and third effects each once per turn. 1 during the main phase as a quick effect, you contribute 1 monster, special summon this card from your hand. 2 before damage calculation, if your worm type monster battles an opponent's monster, special summon from the extra deck, you can destroy that opponent's monster and this card. And 3, if this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material, you can target 1 card on the field or in either graveyard and banish it. The first part of the effect is okay because you're just able to special summon this by attributing another one of your monsters. Again, like the other version, this is fine because rather than you having to tribute over something normally and then just normal as summoning this, you do have the normal summon and this special summon, which means you're not wasting part of your turn. The secondary effect, if any of your worm type monsters battles an opponent's monster that special summon from the extra deck, you can destroy that opponent's monster and this card. Is good because it doesn't rely purely on your Xiangjian cards. It's on any of your worm types which all of the archetype fit around. It does make itself the vessel of destruction, and I would have preferred if it had been able to destroy the monster that you are attacking with. So for example, if it's any of your other worm type monsters rather than getting rid of this, it could have the effect where it just destroys outright your opponent's monster. It is also conditional on your opponent's extra deck, so if they've not got anything special summoned from there, then this effect doesn't get to resolve. And actually it's one way that this card can be very easily countered if your opponent's able to just boost things up beyond the 2,400 attack points and just outrun this card before they actually go into the extra deck. Yes, it will slow a bit down, but it's also determined on if your worm monsters attack into that extra deck monster. So if your opponent chooses to attack with something else before that, even if they've got an extra deck monster up, it's not punishing them, so they don't even have to go with the strategy I just mentioned previously. The third effect, if it's used as part of the synchro material, which is part of the standardized effects of all of the secondary parts of their abilities, you're able to just target card on the field or the graveyard and banish it. That's very decent an effect because by banishing it, they're less able to actually access it. There are certain decks that are unable to banish or recover cards from the banished pile, and that might stop them depending on how much knowledge you have on your opponent's strategy. If you know the type of archetypes they're working on, you know the key cards, and therefore you can stop them from getting to those cards. Whereas obviously if you don't know the particular cards and you're just blindly randomly banishing anything, you might be lucky enough to hit into their key cards, but then again, more likely than not, you're probably going to banish something they don't really care about. Xiao the Xiangjian Grand Swordmaster is a level 8 light attribute worm type synchro effect monster with 2,800 attack and 1,000 defense. It requires a tuner and 1 or more non-tuner worm monsters. You can only use one of this card's name's first or second effects per turn, and only once that turn, so this is a hard once per turn effect. 1. If this card is synchro summoned, you can add to your hand or banish 1 Xiangjian card from your deck. 2. As a quick effect, you can banish 1 Xiangjian card or 1 worm monster from your hand or graveyard, then target 1 other effect monster on the field, negate its effects until the end of this turn. Okay, considering this is the first time I've actually read the deck and some of these cards, the synchro monster to me seems a little bit of a downside. I don't think it's as impressive as I was expecting it to be. It has decent attack points, it has very weak defense points. Summoning condition of it is really easy, it's not too specific, it's just a tuner plus non-tuner worm monsters, so it can be used within the Xiangjian as well, not only just through this deck. The synchro summoning of this card just lets you add or banish a Xiangjian card. That means you can search for anything. Most decks have some searcher within their main monsters, let alone their extra deck monsters, as obviously it's more difficult to get the extra deck monsters out. Secondary ability is okay, it's a quick effect, so it can be activated during yours or your opponent's turn to be able to shut down the effects of an effect monster. That can be really useful depending on what your opponent is doing. If they've got a stalling strategy, then you can actually shut them down and maybe then continue your plays without them interrupting you so much. But it does come at the cost of banishing one of your cards, and you might not be able to search and recover those cards quite so easily. The negation also only lasts until the end of the turn. Had this been an effect where it lasts permanently or whilst this card remains face up on the field, I would have argued this is a little bit better. It's a decent card, I just don't think it's as overwhelming as I would have expected it to be. Xiangjian, the Xiangjian Grand Duke, is a level 10 water attribute worm type synchro effect monster with 3000 attack and 3000 defense. It requires a tuner and one non-tuner monster, so it's a generic monster. You can only use this card's name's third effect once per turn. 1. It gains 100 attack and defense for each banished card. Monsters your opponent controls lose 100 attack and defense for each card. 2. If this card would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish one card from your graveyard instead. And 3, if a card becomes banished, you can banish one card each from your opponent's field and graveyard. I have just read this and I can absolutely understand why people are going nuts for this archetype. The other boss monster, that was petty, I don't think very usable. This card is scary. It's incredibly powerful and it's going to be very difficult to out. Firstly, 3000 attack and defense. It is balanced in both attack and defense. Your opponent isn't just going to be able to switch modes and then get over it that easily. Its summoning condition is so easy to go into, you don't actually have to use this archetype. You can actually just use any archetype, so long as you've got tuners and non-tuners to make up a level 10 monster, you can do so. There is no limitation on it, which is very bizarre. The first effect is very good because it gains 100 attack and defense for each banished card. So, it's going to be constantly doing this anyway. You've got your other Xiangjian monsters that do banish and recover each other, so you've got that interaction. So even when this card is first summoned, it's not going to start off with 3000 attack. It's going to be above that. The other thing is, for every 100 attack points you're gaining, your opponent is losing that many attack points. You've got to think that they're going to lose so many attack points, they're not going to be able to get over this card, even if they summon anything with original attack points more than this. You also need to consider that if they're running a deck that does use banishing, it's for each banished card in general. It's yours and your opponent's banish pile, not just yours alone. That means the more they banish, the more they're going to be harming themselves as well. That's a fantastic first effect. I know it's a very straightforward effect, but sometimes the most elegant cards are the ones that with the most simplistic effects. Secondary ability, just if this card will be destroyed by a card effect, banishing a card from your graveyard instead. Very easy to do. You will have multiple cards already in your graveyard just to synchro summon this card, and even, you're not progressively going to get this within your first turn, most likely second or third turn if you're at a push, and just by banishing that keeps the card on the field. Okay, the downside is it's only destroyed by a card effect, so non-targeting spell and trap cards can work on this. Things like Drowning Mirror Force and the like are a bit of a nightmare for this card. But if you're running certain cards, and I'm suggesting for running with this White Veil would work particularly well if you're going into the battle phase. This is a very battle-centric strategy, and it's definitely a card I would consider that would work very well with this. Third effect, if a card becomes banished, just even through the second effect, which is really useful, you can banish a card each from your opponent's field and their graveyard. That's any card from their field and graveyard, so that's monster, spell or trap. You can get rid of some of their key cards without them being able to do anything. They can't do anything either, because you've got to consider that they have no access. They have no way of preventing that from happening unless they're running Imperial Iron Wall, which prevents either player from banishing cards, or you have to consider that, they can't do anything. And since you're banishing a card from the field and the graveyard, that's an additional 200 attack and defense points you're gaining and a reduction on your opponent's monsters. That can be very devastating if that's constantly happening. And even if you want to be quite cheeky about it, you're able to trigger this effect yourself as well. Because if you try to destroy this card with even your card effects, you can actually keep triggering off this effect. It's not just your opponent's card effects, which a lot of monsters tend to have as an ability. It's both what you and your opponent try and do to this card. The Xiangjian Dragon Sword appears as a normal spell card with the effect. You can only use the first and second effects of this card's name each once per turn. 1. Add 1 Xiangjian monster from your deck to your hand, or if you control a synchro monster, you can add 1 worm monster instead. 2. If this card is banished, you can target 1 Xiangjian or worm monster you control, increase or decrease its level by 1 until the end of this turn. If anyone knows what the significance of this card is, please put those in the comments down below. I am a little bit confused about what its relevance is. Considering firstly, okay, you can search for a Xiangjian monster or a worm monster. If you've got a synchro monster, that's fine as an effect. It's decent, it's a continuous ability to do so. And obviously you're able to manipulate your monster's levels. So you can either go into the level 8 or the level 10. But I think out of what I've seen so far, this is probably the worst of the cards. Not saying that it's bad, it's just not the best. Xiangjian Men, the Grand Spiritual Peak, is a normal spell card with the effect. You can only use the first and second effects of this card's name each once per turn. 1. Target 1 Xiangjian monster in your graveyard. Special summon it. If you control a synchro monster, you can target 1 worm monster instead. And 2. If this card is banished, you can target 1 Xiangjian or worm monster you control, increase or decrease its level by 1 until the end of this turn. The first part of the effect is a bit of a monster reborn. It works on any of your Xiangjian cards. If you have the synchro monster, you do have the benefit of targeting a worm monster. It's fine as an effect. It helps to actually further your strategies and maybe go into a further synchro monster. Again, the secondary effect is much like the previous card, where you can actually banish this to manipulate the levels of one of your monsters. So you can either go into the level 8 or the level 10 much more easily. Xiangjian Research is a normal trap card with the effect. You can only use the first and second effects of this card's name each once per turn. 1. Target 1 face-up monster you control. Banish up to 5 Xiangjian cards and or worm monsters from your graveyard, and if you do, that target gains 300 attack for each. And 2. If this card is banished, you can special summon 1 Xiangjian token, Worm Water Tuner, level 4 with 0 attack and 0 defense. While this token is on the field, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except synchro monsters. Now, if this archetype was looking for any type of power boosting trap cards, this is definitely the one I would say is incredibly powerful. Firstly, by banishing all 5 of the Zhang cards, that monster will get 1,500 attack points. Also, you need to consider that the level 10 monster gains an additional 100 attack points for each card banished, so that's an extra 500 attack points on that, making it a grand total boost of 2,000. And since this is banishing whilst it's in its presence on the field, it's then able to use its effect to banish some of your opponent's cards, a field card and a graveyard card, which adds a further 200 attack points to its total. You are looking from this card alone to maximize its effect. 2,200 attack points on an already 3,000 attack point monster. That makes it a total of 5,200 attack points. That is going to be impossible to get over. Secondary ability is actually just the same as some of the original monsters. They're able to banish this card to get one of the tokens out. It's not a difficult ability, and actually at least having a double utility effect is also very usable. And the final card is Xiangjian Sudden Shift. This is a normal trap card with the effect. You can only use the first and second effects of this card's name each once per turn. 1. Target 1 worm monster you control and 2 cards your opponent controls. Destroy them. 2. If this card is banished, you can special summon 1 Xiangjian token, Worm Water Tuner, level 4 with 0 attack and defense. While this token is on the field, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except synchro monsters. So this card is very much like Icarus Attack. You target one of your worm monsters and destroy it. In contrast, you're able to destroy 2 of your opponent's cards. They could be monsters, spell, or traps. It's not specific to any of them. So that's the likeness I can compare to it. It is an even draw because you are losing the 2 cards, the monster and this trap card, for 2 of your opponent's cards. And if you're in a decent position already, that's not a cost to you. It's going to be more disruptive to your opponent, especially if they're on the back foot. Secondary ability is the same as the monsters and the previous trap card that I mentioned. It generates the token. The tokens are very important because they actually become tuner monsters, and that means they can be used as part of the synchro summon without having to add and chop and change so many different types of monsters within the deck. Overall, I love the design of this deck. I think it's a brilliant archetype and it's very usable. It's not difficult to understand either. I've been able to understand the main concept of this deck just by looking at it when I'm talking to you right now. This has not been pre-recorded. This is not me, re-reviewing it beforehand and then giving my opinions. I've understood how this deck likes to work as and when I've recorded this. So if I can understand it, then chances are most people can understand it. Even smaller kids might be able to understand with a little bit of support. It's a very generic strategy and is actually decent enough that any player can pick up within, I would say, half an hour of pulling these cards. What do you guys think of these cards? I know the community is going, a bit insane on them. They are going to be very highly valued, and I hope they keep the rarities to be balanced. They're not going to be too overly powered. Whatever you think, leave those comments down below. Are you someone who's looking to play these cards? Like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh content.